Tarik Skubal trade packages. Who has the ability to actually get this done based on the strength of their farm system? And if they were to actually get it done, who are the prospects from that team going back to the Tigers at the deadline? I was asked by MLB Network earlier this week to put together some trade packages for a segment with Greg Amsinger. I'll link to that exact segment in the video description if you want to check it out. But for now, in this video, I'm going to dig into how I arrived at some of the logic that went into building these packages. I'll also show you some non-public data on some of the minor league guys that I selected that I think would be good fits to go back to Detroit to match the surplus value of a guy like Tarik Skubal, which is where we will start. We have to come up with some number that we can match with prospect value. So how do we get to that number? We're looking at basically him getting $12 million from the deadline onward rest of season. He's projected for around 2 WAR in those 2 months. Pretty insane. He's basically a WAR per month pitcher, which gets you to a value of $20 million. The postseason stuff is difficult to actually put a monetary value on. I just went with 1 WAR throughout the postseason for an average team, and I jumped that dollar per WAR a bit higher than the $10 million I was using for the value of him in 2026 in those final 2 months. Then you have the ability to attach a QO to him as the Tigers if you keep him, which is another thing you have to consider. I arrived at about $5 million on that based on the fact that that is a sandwich round pick in the 2027 draft, presumably. We'll see what happens with the CBA. And the value of that is probably somewhere in this 45-ish kind of prospect tier, which is in this $4 to $6 million range. So I went with $5 million. That gets you to a surplus value number of about $30 million, which you can see right here. So what we're trying to do is basically select prospects in these various tiers. And in these individual tiers, there are dollar amounts attached to them. I like using Fangraphs farm system rankings here just to basically pull in the values, surplus value, so I don't have to calculate out some of the specifics as I did with Skubal here. I will link it to that also in the video description if you want to check out what they're doing. It's not the best math in the world. I've had other organizations kind of reach out and say, hey, some of this is a bit off, but in the history of me doing this, which I did at last year's deadline, I do find it comes roughly close. And a lot of the time what we're really trying to do is almost match things into a puzzle. You know, you have the pieces of the puzzle. There's different names that could be each of those pieces. We're just trying to match them back to Skubal. So even if it's slightly off based on how organizations value things, I do think it's valuable to some extent to at least understand how changing a guy's tier can change the surplus calculation in here. That's probably the central thing to point out here, is that based on how you have a guy graded, so if you have him as a 45 plus bat versus a 50 plus bat, that's like a $20 million swing. Again, the surplus of Skubal's $30 million. While organizations often glob around a specific, let's say, value tier for a given prospect, I do think there still is variance in organizations, and that's really what you're trying to isolate here. You're trying to find who matches up with the Tigers, which prospect do the Tigers really like relative to how that team internally has the guy ranked, such that both sides maybe feel a little uncomfortable with the deal, but at the end of the day, get it done. The Dodgers are the obvious favorite here. On MLB Network, I went with Ryan and Mike Sirota as my 2 centerpieces. Now, I get Ryan is old. He's already 27 years old. He's still a 50 future value pitcher. Maybe he's like a little bit less than that in some organizations because of his age. You have him for 6 years of control. It'll take him into like his age 33 season. And if you think there's some velo or strikes regression when he hits like 31, then yeah, maybe he's not actually worth $20 million surplus, especially with the injury he's coming off. Mike Sirota, I really like as a prospect. And I also decided in this video to throw in Adam Serenowski, who's a name they acquired, who is also kind of fun, but he's more like a 45 future value. And yeah, if Detroit wants the best package, they just go to the Dodgers. Primarily because the Dodgers have a ton of prospects, and you can take your pick. I also went with the theme of not taking the team's best prospect, because I don't think in a lot of cases that's going to be the piece the team's willing to give up for a rental. Boras is going to take Skubal to free agency. Sure, you might be competitive, but you really got to think internally as an org whether you can even compete with the Dodgers' pocketbooks in terms of how much they want to give up. So Josue DePaula, to me, off the table. Zyhir Hope, again, I think he could be on the table. Maybe that pulls down Ryan to someone else. But the strength of the Dodgers is that there's basically a lot of guys here. Do the Tigers like Tibbs? Do they like Quintero? Like, there's a ton of guys in here. They're all really good. If they don't like Ryan, then maybe you go down to Christian Zazueta, who's also really good. So I want to point out just, let's say Sirota. This is a nice little portal I have. It's not publicly available. It's from data I get from an individual in organization. It just helps me visualize what we're talking about. These are this is a radial chart. Essentially, as you get further out and this gets more filled in, that means you're in higher percentiles, which are better on all of these metrics. So the key ones I like looking at are like this side is more your whiff, this is more your contact quality. So you see Sirota is awesome at everything. It's a very similar story with Hope, although he did, I believe, year over year drop a little. Yeah, he started chasing more a bit. He's still lifting the ball better than almost anybody in baseball. If you go back to 2025 on Hope, he was lifting the ball literally better than anybody in baseball. So I like Sirota a bit better than Hope. DePaul is really like the guy that I imagine the Tigers would love to get. He's such a disciplined hitter, hits the ball really hard, and lifts it as well. So again, all these guys, like even Quintera, I think is really good too, right? These guys are so polished that they could go in any direction they want to go. You know, Tibbs is maybe the weakest of that bunch, but that's totally fine. He just misses in zone a bit more, but he's still a pretty good player. I know I still have the logo here of the Red Sox, but that's my point here. Is like it doesn't really matter what the Tigers want. I think maybe that's a bad way to put it. They have so many options that they have to go back to the Dodgers at the end of the day when they get an offer from any other organization and determine, can you beat this? Basically is what they're going to ask the Dodgers. That's going to be the last phone call that Scott Harris makes, in my opinion. Zazueta's right here. You can see pretty interesting four-seam shape, lower arm angle guy, throws pretty hard. It's a good two-plane pitch, pretty classic Dodger pitcher here, quality fastball, good release traits, kind of a shorter slider. So a lot of names you could go with. Again, you want to turn this into Christian Zazueta, and you want to turn this into Zyhir Hope, and maybe, I spelled that wrong, Zyhir Hope. And let's say because of going to Hope and Zazueta, it takes Sirotowski off the table. You still get a mismatch of about $20 million. The reason I'm shooting over the surplus here is through this fourth point. I do think at the deadline, there's a bit less rationality involved in some of these packages in determining surplus value because the pool of talent available is just smaller. I think that maybe what I'm building here from a one-to-one standpoint is better for the offseason when you have more suitors, there's a bigger pool of talent, there's free agents and everything else. So just something to consider here. The other team I want to point out is the Yankees. The Yankees are in an interesting spot. Not as deep of a farm system as the Dodgers. I do think it would probably have to come down to Dax Kilby, who was really good last year. He was a late first rounder in 25 who popped. He's down with a hamstring injury right now, rehabbing on the complex. But he's like the 50 future value guy in that org. The other one is Carlos Lagrange, who's a pretty electric arm, who's going to be converted to a reliever at AAA to eventually impact the Yankees bullpen. It seems to me like that's lower probability that the Tigers would want to go in that direction purely because Lagrange hasn't thrown a ton of strikes. So in my opinion, I would go after Kilby, and I would combo Kilby with two arms that are pretty interesting. Elmer Rodriguez, it's kind of like a pretty classic low slot, cut the ball, a bunch of different shapes, strong breaking ball feel. We saw him up at the bigs, didn't really succeed. I think that's more of like a fringe 4-ish, 5-ish profile, but maybe the Tigers can unlock something. Ben Hess is a really interesting piece. This guy comps to Gavin Williams. Ton of big shapes, as you can see here. It's a big sweeper, a big slow curveball down at 75 miles per hour, and then he throws 94 on his fastball. He's up to 96. Ton of life, ton of carry. Big dude again. Pretty good amount of extension. He's still at like just a above average release height. So interesting name. Again, I think that I would prefer the Dodgers package, especially if they would throw in Sirotowski here. But the Yankees can be competitive. It's just a matter of whether the Tigers want a young bat as far off as Kilby is. That's maybe the point of this that I mentioned right here. I'm trying to bias towards close to major league talent for a lot of these trades because I think it's going to be a really tough sell for the Tigers organization to not take a guy who's close. You know, it's hard. I don't want to jump ahead, but well, the Padres are the team that I got ridiculed for not bringing in to this MLB Network segment. And to me, they just have too many names that are far away. It's a tough sell for the Tigers to go, yeah, we'll take two arms that are 3.5 years off for Skubal and now rebuild, despite the fact we have McGonigal and Riley Green and some other good names and some other young pitchers, Troy Mellon, just other guys who haven't stayed healthy. So I just think they need close to major league talent. So that's kind of one of the standards I tried to take. That creates a little bit of concern around Kilby. You could also go to the Brewers, who are in an interesting spot. I initially didn't think the Brewers had enough to get this done, but the more I talk to people in the industry, I do think they do. Now, it's just a little odder of a fit, especially if the Tigers want to go after like a close to MLB arm, which is what Zazueta would be to some extent, a little bit further along than maybe like a Ben Hess or something along those lines. River Ryan's like very much can just slide in right now to the Tigers rotation. They have control. That's why I think that name is so appealing. there's not a lot of other names, I think, in that Riverine tier that would be on the market for a Skubal unless you just go to a major league pitcher, which is why I think Jeff Passan mentioned the Mariners in some of these conversations. That'd be really interesting. Give them like Emerson Hancock in another piece or something along those lines. The Brewers, I went with Jet Williams, which would be hilarious if they trade for Jet Williams from the Mets and then trade Jet Williams for another pitcher who's expiring. It'd be a little counterintuitive with the Freddie Peralta trade, but shorter dude, pretty good batted ball data despite the fact that he is short. I'll pull him up quickly and just show you. Again, doesn't scorch the ball, but lifts it pretty well. I think he's maybe a guy who projects for like 15 homers, but really disciplined hitter. Very much like a Brewers hitter. Is he a Tigers hitter? It's a great question. Luis Lara is in a similar vein. Really good defender in center. As to whether the Tigers would actually want this guy as somewhat of a centerpiece, don't know. He's on the ground a ton, running like a 52% ground ball rate's a bit aggressive, but again, really good plate approach. A lot of hitters on the present Brewers team look like this. Well, they don't have the best contact quality, but they control the zone really well and max out their power through pull. So interesting names there. And then I think the piece that honestly might get this done if I'm the Brewers is Bishop Letson. Again, he's also a bit off, but he's one of my favorite pitching prospects in the minors. Really fun release traits, 7.2 extension. He's down to like a 5.4 release height. He's got such good feel of this slider sweeper. I mean, he's striking this thing more than he's striking his fastball up at 64%, 58% zone rate. It generates not a great amount of miss, but you go back to last season and he was generating a ton of miss. He's struggling right now. I get it, but the raw traits of what he does are so fun, and his breaking ball feels so good that he feels like the name that might get this over. You know, if you turn him into more of like a, let's say the Tigers view him as like what I'd call a fringe, like a 50-45 type here, you could push this up, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a pretty nice surplus over the Dodgers in terms of the value you're giving the Tigers for Skubal. As to whether they want to give up this much, don't know. Like, this would definitely deplete their farm. As we go back to Kylie McDaniel's ranks here for end of the show, Kylie does great work. Yeah, this would be giving up a lot. Like, it wouldn't be giving up Pena and Mate, which is really what I think they want to do. Maybe you could sub in Cooper Pratt for Jet Williams. Again, that makes sense. But you'd be giving up 1, 2, 3 of your top 6-ish. That's a lot. It's a big chunk. But again, if you're the Brewers and trying to go for it, maybe you try to go in that direction. The Cubs are kind of interesting in the same respect, where they don't have a lot of top-end pitching depth in any capacity, such that I don't know if the Tigers are gonna want Pedro Ramirez and Kevin Alcantara. Pedro's more bat over glove, really good hit tool. I do think he's gonna hit in the majors. You'd consider him like a 50 future value bat, so he's worth a pretty penny. 28 million surplus is what I have here. And then Kevin Alcantara is kind of like this fringe type that everyone's been waiting on to mature at the major league level, I would say, from a bat standpoint, and show some consistency. He's been good in the minors this year. He's lifting the ball more. I wouldn't say maybe he's a full 50 future value bat. He's probably right on that fringe, but again, that's still worth a lot. And then you throw in Caleb Wing, who is a guy that is now on like the upswing in the organization. He was a big high school signee of theirs. He has like a super high slot, really fun changeup off it. I don't have his data to show you, but he's a name that I wonder whether the Cubs would be uncomfortable shipping just because they don't have any pitching depth in the minor leagues. You can look at the Phillies as well. Aidan Miller's down with a back injury. That's a little bit scary. I guess my assumption in building that package was that Aidan would be healthy by the time you get to the deadline. And in that case, yeah, you would like him because he crushes the ball and has a really good zone approach. Could probably lift the ball a bit more, but max EV up at 115. You know, he was like a top 20 prospect in baseball entering this season if you remove the back injury, and I think he would have really pushed for the major league roster at some point, but he's a really fun bat. You could do Gage Wood if you don't want Aidan Miller because of the back injury, but similar situations like the Brewers where you're just completely depleting the farm, and even more so than the Brewers. The Brewers would still have Mate and Pena. Phillies would not. Phillies would have like nobody. I mean, Chassé is like an interesting arm, but he's a 45. He's not even in that plus window to me. Aaron Escobar. Again, same situation. So you would really have to get the Tigers to love Gage Wood in order to make this deal work. And I just don't entirely know whether that is a possibility from my standpoint. So again, you're thinking of all these packages, the 5 packages we just looked at, comparison to one another. If this is the foundation, the Phillies, I think, are out. I would say the Cubs are out. I even say maybe the Yankees would be out just from, I don't know on Dax Kilby from the Tigers' perspective of selling that. They'd have to love Ben Hess, who I do like, but they'd have to love him. So again, ripping through these packages, the Dodgers and the Brewers, I think, could put together competitive offers for Skubal. And as I said, they're going to have to eventually go back to the Dodgers and say, hey, we got this from the Brewers, can you beat it? And then the Dodgers are probably going to go, sure, yeah, I bet we can beat it because we have an absolutely loaded farm system. You can also think of the Braves in this equation. This would be if the Tigers just want a bunch of arms, which they very much could. Not a lot of these other teams have what I would call like 45 plus to 55-ish arms in the quantity that the Braves do, where the Braves can give these guys up and still keep a Cam Caminiti, who's the top pitching prospect in that organization. So would they be willing to give up Fuentes, who hasn't really figured out in the majors, really fun flat approach fastball? OWen Murphy is interesting. He just doesn't throw that hard. So he's actually a name that I'm pretty intrigued by. If I am the let's see if I can find him for you quick. OWen Murphy. If I'm the Tigers and I'm looking at him and can see some velo development, I know he's a shorter extender, but I think he's a bit of an undersized dude. But yeah, his fastball is really fun. It's around this like negative 4.2 VAA, which I think it's probably about 85th percentile Major League Baseball. He's up at AAA right now. This four seam has regressed slightly with the Major League Baseball at AAA, but it's still like 18-7, 18-6 from his 5.6 release height. So it's good. It's a fastball foundation. Would love for him to throw harder. He's been up to 96, but sitting 92 this season. So some room for improvement. That's similar to like the Bishop Letson case, where you look at Letson and go, if the Tigers absolutely love this name, then you can see that getting done. Synard is kind of like a throw-in name to me that helped the money even out a bit. But yeah, I think they could do that. Maybe you throw in this Eric Hartman kid that's been popping for the Braves. Maybe I wrongfully pulled him out, but I wanted to make the Braves package the idea that, hey, if the Tigers want a bunch of arms, they can absolutely do that. The Padres, I kind of alluded to earlier, in a weird situation where they have like very little in a farm system. If you look at Fangraphs ranking of their top prospects, they have 25. So Fangraphs usually just pulls in all the dudes they think are relevant. Most teams are in the 30s and 40s. Padres have nobody. I mean, they have literally like 2 to 3 names that are 45 pluses, which on our scale here means they have like 2 to 3 names worth $5 million or more in their organization. You'd have to trade 2 of them if you want to keep Ethan Salas, who is probably a top 10, 20 prospect in baseball by most accounts. Kash Mayfield, recent draftee, kind of a deceptive lefty who throws hard. I'll pull up his data quick. I think he's fine, but he's also another guy that you're going to need some velo development with. He's sitting 91 miles per hour. Fun release traits, again, big extension, low release height down at 5'5", and it's a pretty two-planey fastball, but this template of pitcher is interesting. It's a little Cam Caminiti in a way, but Cam throws like 4 or 5 miles per hour harder, which is why he's a very interesting prospect for the Braves and one that I don't think the Braves would give up. But similar to OWen Murphy, let's say on Kash Mayfield, the Tigers have to look at him and go, we can do velo development here better and get him to a point where he's a more successful pitching prospect. Four-seam change slider. Schoolcraft is in a similar area. These guys are just so far away to me. Similar template here. He just throws harder. Schoolcraft's a huge dude. And if there's more velo in that tank, he could get really interesting. He cuts the ball really well too, which makes me think there are more like cutty shapes in here for him. He's more intriguing almost to me than Kash Mayfield, despite the fact I think most people have Kash ahead. I really like Schoolcraft, but I mean, what's his debut timeline? 2029, 2030? And they're really going to sell that as the Skubal trade as the Tigers? So I don't know. I would say if you want to get this done without these guys and make it interesting, then what you'd have to do is throw in Ethan Salas, which is kind of fun, right? That would make this intriguing. It would make it probably uncomfortable for the Padres, but it doesn't seem like Preller's ever been hesitant to put in a name as good as Ethan Salas let's put him right there, into this. And then you probably wouldn't even have to give up any of the other 2. I think Salas is a good enough prospect. He's probably the best prospect we've talked about here, which could swing it. The other way to swing this is through the Rays. In a similar vein, you'd have to throw in probably Theo Gillen, who is absolutely crushing it in the minors right now. This looks like an insane pick by the Rays. You want to look at our radial plot here again. This is probably the best one we've looked at. Lifting the ball hard in the air, hitting it hard, really good plate approach. I know he's down in the lower levels of the minors right now, but super fun name, definitely a riser. Maybe the industry hasn't caught up internally in terms of internal grades, which maybe gives you a small advantage. You want to throw in a near major league quality starting pitcher too. Santiago Suarez is kind of interesting. Pull him up. It's a big extension, low release, pretty consistent theme among exciting pitching prospects. Super pronator, 97% four-seam spin efficiency, but he throws hard. There are a bunch of strikes here, so he's fun. This is a classic Tampa template, four-seam fastball, bunch of slider, in zone a lot. Fun name that I think would get this done. So I kind of like the Rays package here. I just don't know their willingness to give up like a Theo Gillen, the same way I don't know the Padres' willingness to give up an Ethan Salas. So I think the paths to either of these teams doing it is just, it's narrower to me, which is why I will always revert back to the Dodgers and the Brewers. So I hope this did a good job of kind of rattling your brain around how you get these deals done. For Skubal, I think that I'm roughly on track here. I think it's going to cost probably 2 fringe 50-ish future value types to the Tigers alongside another name. And of course, maybe there's other stuff thrown in. As I mentioned right here, there will be more in the deal. Maybe there's some contract spreading in either direction, contract offsetting. But the Tigers should eat as much of that salary as they're willing to eat rest of season and take the best prospect. And if that's how the Padres or the Rays get it done, then hat tip to them. But it feels to me like it's a Dodgers pitcher to lose, which I know is very unfortunate for a lot of people in baseball. But anyways, thanks for checking out this video. I wanted to get this one up quick, just get you through some minor league stuff. And yeah, I guess if you want any other names or any other proposed packages, let me know in the comments. I could try to hang out and throw some basic data on just what I see in the guy's stuff or whatever. I know some of this stuff isn't public, so yeah, it might be valuable to you guys. Thanks as always for checking out the channel, and I'll see you soon.